How are you developers? I trust you are doing well. In today's video, we'll be doing our fourth project that will be a to-do application. So in this project, we'll create a simple to-do app that will perform the basic CRUD operations. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's dive in. So first, if you're following the course, you're aware that there's a repo that you always push the codes there. So if you have access to that repo, you can just pull the changes. And if you are new, I'll provide the link to the repo in the video description. So once you pull the changes from that repo, you'll see this app 04 to do app. It's a folder. Inside that folder, there's a HTML file, a CSS file, a JavaScript file, and a README file. So the README file explains about the app and what it does. So we'll go through the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript files together. But the JavaScript file is currently empty, and this is the file that will be writing our code together. But the HTML, as you can see, it has some content, and the CSS also has some content. So let us go through the HTML and the CSS contents to see what they contain. Then we'll start writing our JavaScript code together. So in the HTML file, as you can see, there's this head which contains the title and the metadata and the link to the style sheet and a favicon there. So the body has a main tag that has an h1 that displays the app. It's called a to-do app. Then there's this button here. The work of this button is to add a new task. So when someone clicks this button, a form should pop up and someone should fill that form with the tasks that they want to add in that to-do app. So this is the form that always pop up. Currently it's hidden, it has this class hidden, and we'll hide it in the CSS. We'll see how we'll hide this form in the CSS. It's already hidden. So this form contains a button. This is a close button, and as you can see, it is an SVG, but it's just an icon to represent a close button. And when someone clicks this button, this form should be hidden or should be closed. Then the form contains some inputs like the title of the task that you want to add, the date that you're supposed to complete that task, and the description of that task. Then there's this button here to add tasks. So after filling the form, you will click this button called add task, and the form should be saved in the local storage. We'll talk about local storage in this video. Then there's this dialog box. So in case someone clicks that close button that we saw up here, when someone clicks that close button, this dialog box should show up, and this dialog box is just a form to ask the user if they want to discard the changes or they want to continue editing the form. So if a user presses cancel, it should go back to the form and the user should be able to continue to edit. But when the user presses discard, it should close the dialog box and also close the form. I think that is clear. Then this is a div here. It's an empty div, and this div is the div that will contain our actual tasks. So if you add a task in the form and press this add task button, the task should be added in this div and someone should be able to see it in the UI. So that is basically the HTML, nothing much. And there's this script tag to link to our JavaScript file. So our CSS, let us look at our CSS. It's a little bit long, almost over 100 lines, almost 200 lines. So our CSS, we defined our variables here. They're just colors, all of them. Then let me just go to the specific things that I want you to know. Let me just slide. There's this form, task form. Let me just search for it. Find. Yeah, you see this class, the task form had a class called hidden. So you can see this class called hidden. It has a display of none, and we'll greatly use this task in our we'll use that class in our JavaScript so much. So I wanted to show you that. I think that is the only thing that I want to show you. You can go through the CSS and you can see there is nothing new. It's just the same CSS that I've been doing: height, width, padding, margin, font size, font weight. Everything is just the same thing that we have been doing since the first day of CSS. So there's nothing new here. You have to know about the flex, because this is a mostly used display here, display flex. I think that is the only thing that you have to know. And something about the position, this is position absolute. I think you have to know about the position, and there's a small transform there that has been performed. But basically the CSS is just simple, and you can just go through it and see what it entails. So that is it with the HTML and CSS. As I said earlier, our JavaScript is an empty file, and we'll be the one writing this JavaScript for us. So before we write this JavaScript code, let's first create an algorithm. Like we said in other videos, that you cannot just write code. You have to have something like steps that guide you to in writing your code. So we always call it algo.md. So we always create a markdown file and call it algo, and in that markdown file we usually put our steps. So let's do that before writing our code. So I'll create a new file in this folder. I'll create a new file. I'll call it algo.md to show that it's a markdown file. Then I'll just paste the steps. I already had them, but I'll just explain to you step by step. So the first step is the initialization. So I'll initialize all my variables. Like I'll get all the DOM elements from the HTML and store them as variable in my JavaScript. This will be my first task, and I'll do this task for all the variables that I'll use, so that I don't go back to my HTML and get the variables again. Then the next task, I'll listen for event listeners. Like when someone clicks that add button, listen for the click event and maybe open a form and do those things that I'm supposed to do. Then I'll define the function. The first function that I'll define is for add or update tasks. That is the first function I'll define. The next function will be for delete tasks, then edit tasks. Then I'll define this reset function for clearing the form after someone has filled it. Then the last thing will be storing my data in local storage. This will be the last task that we'll do. So basically that is how we'll do the app. So before we start writing code, let me also run this HTML so that you can see how the app looks like before we even start coding it. So let's run this file first. So if you run this file, this is what it will, that's how it looks like. So if someone press this add new task, a form should pop up and I should be able to fill that form. And when I click, the form will have an X button on the top right. When I click that X button, it should fill the form. If I fill in that form and click the submit button, it should save my data and place them here in the UI. And the form this data should have an edit and delete button. So if I click that delete button, this data should be removed, and if I click edit button, a form should come up again. Then I should be able to edit the task. I think that one is clear. So let us just start writing our JavaScript code. So now we'll start our application. Let me just open this algorithm using my markdown preview first, so that I can view it here. Then I'll open my CSS here, like that. I'll close this one. So now I have my HTML file here, my CSS file here, my JavaScript file here, and my algorithm here. So I'll be following this algorithm step by step, so that we can go in order. Let me just put this CSS here because I'm not using it much, and this JavaScript to be close to it. Okay, so as you can see in the algorithm, our first task is to initialize the variables. So I'll declare the constants for the HTML elements. So I'll go to my HTML and get these elements. So the first element that I'll get is this add new task button. So I'll get that element. So I'll create a variable here. I'll say const. I'll paste that. Then I'll use the get element by ID. Get element by ID, and I'll use that ID that I copied. Then I'll just change this variable to use the camel case. By now you know about the camel case. So camel case, the first letter will be a lowercase, then the rest will be capitalized. The first letter of each word will be capitalized, but the first letter of the first word will be lowercase. So that is my first variable that I've gotten. It's called open task form button. Yeah. The next one that I'll get is this form. So our actual form, it's called task form. So I'll get that form also, the variable. So I'll say const task form. Let me just rename it so that I can prevent errors early. Task form is equals to get element document first, get element by ID, then I paste the actual ID there. That is my second variable. So yeah, I'll go to my next variable. I'll get this button. this button. It has an ID of close task form button. I'll get that ID and use it as a variable name. So I'll say const, I paste it there, then I customize it a little bit like that. Yeah, I think that's fine. Then I'll use get element by ID again. So now you're just getting the variables that will be used for this app. So that's the third variable that I've gotten. So I'll still go scrolling and look for another button, another variable that I'll get. Let me subtract this HTML first so that I cannot miss the variables. So I think you've already gotten this button. So we don't need this SVG, you don't need the path, we need this input here. We need that input. We need this input. So this input has this ID called title input. So it's a title input. I'll get that one. So I'll say const title input. Then I'll capitalize the second letter like that. It's equals to document get element by ID. Then I paste the actual ID. So I'm doing this by now. I hope everyone knows how to get these elements from DOM. It's actually easy. So yeah, then I'll get this date input also. It has an ID of date input here. Date input. Get that one also. So I'll say const date input. Is equals document get elements by ID. Then I paste the actual ID. So I'll just continue. The next one is this one called description input. Where is it? I'll get this one ID description input. Yeah, that's the next variable that I'll use. I use get element by ID because all of these ones are IDs, so I'll use this get element by ID. Yeah, I think that's good. Then we just continue. Then there is this button called add or update button. This button. So when someone fills that form, there's this button that we will use. So I'll just create it here. It's too long, but I'll just rename it slowly. There's no hurry. I'm to take this step by step so that even the beginners can just flow with me. So I'll say document get element by ID. Then I'll paste the actual ID there. So that was the add or delete button, add or update task button. So I'll just continue. I'll get this dialog. So this is the dialog that will show in case someone clicks the close button. So I'll get this ID for the confirm close dialog. So I'll just create a variable there, call it that one, confirm close dialog. Is equals to document or get element by ID. Then I'll paste the actual ID there. Yeah. So we'll continue. Let me look for another thing that I can get. This cancel button and the cancel and the discard button. So I'll use these IDs. Cancel button is that one. So I'll just say here const cancel button. I paste the actual cancel button. And there's this discard button. We get it here. Discard button. Say const discard button. Document get element by ID. Then I paste the actual discard button. Then the last variable that we'll get is this task containers. We will be writing our tasks. So I'll get that also. Say const, just paste it. That's the last variable that we'll get from the HTML. Okay, that was a little bit tedious, but we have got all of them. So these are the variables that we used. I put them ID intentionally because I was aware that I'll use them. So don't ask me how did I know that I'll use these things, because I have this that guides me and I know all the variables that I'll use, and these are the variables. Then I'll have to create another 2 variables. One is an array that will store all my tasks along with the associated data, and later we'll store these ones in the local storage, but currently let's first store them in an array. So I'll create that array here. So let me create that array. I'll call it task data, and initially it will be an empty array because currently there's no tasks. So when we start the app, there'll be no tasks. So the next one, I'll create a current task, and the current task will be an object, and that will be the task that someone is editing it or adding it. So I'll create a current task. You can see that's the, in the algorithm it tells us first create a task data to store the task objects, then create the current task to hold the current task selected. So that is the thing that will create the current task. I'll say let current task to equal to an empty object. So with that, we'll be having all our variables. If we need some extra variables, we'll declare them, but that's the initial step for declaring our variables. Let me just add a comment here on top here. I'll say these ones are just variable declaration variables. These are just variables. So you have completed. So the next task that we'll do is to add event listeners first for this open task form. Open task form button. This, where is it? I'll first add an event listener to this. Let me show you in the HTML. The first event listener I'll add is this one here. This button here. We called it open task form button. Open task form button. So when someone clicks that button, it should open the form. So that is the first event listener that we'll add. So let's do that. So to add the event listeners, I'll just get the element we have saved it in this. It's called open task form button. Then we'll add an event listener, and we'll listen for the click event. So when someone clicks this button, see here, when someone clicks this button and to open this form, I told you initially this form is hidden, and I showed you how it's hidden there. If you search for the hidden class, hidden, you can see it has this class called hidden, and the hidden class makes it display to be none. So we want, when someone clicks this add new task button, we want that hidden class to be removed. So you can listen for that event. So I'll listen for the click event. Then when that is clicked, I'll add an arrow function there. So we know about the class list property. So we can do like class list, and you can use the add method, the remove method, and there's this method called the toggle method. The toggle method we know that the add method adds a class to an element. The remove method removes a class from an element. Now this toggle method will add the class if it is not present on the element, and if the class is present, it will remove it. I think that's a good one. So you can use that toggle. So if it is hidden, make it not to be hidden. If it's not hidden, we want to hide it, because this function will be the same function that we use for adding and deleting. So let us use that toggle. So we'll use that toggle method on this form, and keep in mind that we call the form task form. The form is this one here. It's called task form. So I'll say task form. Let me just copy that. Task form. It's class list. Use the class list property. Then we have said that we'll use this toggle method. Then we'll toggle which class? We'll toggle the hidden class. I think I got the spelling right, yeah. So currently this hidden class is there and just display of none. So when someone clicks this button, we want to remove that class, because I've said the toggle, if the class is there, it removes it, and if it's not there, it adds it. So now since the class is present, it will remove it. So you can go to the browser and check how this works. So if you go to the browser, you can see our app is here. So we added a click event to this button. So when someone clicks it, you can see now the form is being displayed, just like how we wanted to do it. So yeah, that's working fine. Now the next thing that you want to do is that when someone clicks this icon for closing the form, we want first to show a dialog box. The dialog box that was there that I showed you in the HTML, we want to pop it. Now that's our next task. Let us do that. I want to do it step by step. So now when someone clicks this X button, we want to pop that form. So let's go on and do that. So when someone clicks that cross button, we want to show the model. So first we have to get that button. How do you call it? Let me confirm how we call it. It's called, where is it? This one is called close task form button. So you'll get that close task form button. It's here, close task form button. So I'll add event listener to that. So I'll say close task form button, then we'll add an event listener there. We'll listen for the click event. So when someone clicks, we'll call this arrow function here. So what you want to do, you want to show that model, and you can see in the HTML it's a dialog. Where is it? You can see it's a dialog. So if you don't know how to show a dialog on a web page, there's a method called show model, and that method is used to display a model dialog box on a web page, and that is the method that we'll use to display this dialog box. So this dialog box, we called it confirm close dialog. So we'll call that method on this. So I'll say confirm close dialog dot show model. That. So now when someone clicks this cross button, the model should show. And as you can see in this HTML, this model is just asking the user if they want to discard or cancel. So let us go to our browser and confirm that is working before we continue. So if you go to the browser, you can see our app is there. That if I click add new task, the form comes up. And now if I click this icon, you can see the model box. This model form shows. And that is what we wanted. That is what we have done. So now we want, when someone clicks cancel, we want to hide this dialog box again so that someone can continue editing. Maybe someone clicked this cross by mistake, so they can just cancel. And if they're sure, they'll click discard. So first let us handle this cancel thing first. Then next we'll handle the discard. So if someone clicks cancel, we want this dialog box to go away. So let us do that. So we'll get that cancel button. We saved it cancel button here. So I'll just get this cancel button. Then I'll add an event listener to it, and I'll listen for the click event. So when someone clicks you'll put an arrow function here. So when someone clicks that cancel button, and to just close the dialog box. So this, if you want to show the dialog box, use the show model. And if you want to close it, let me just copy paste it. If you want to close it, you just call the close method on it like that. It's just simple. To show the model, you call this show model function, and if you want to close the model, you call this close method. These ones are methods, not functions. They are methods. Show model method and the close method. You call them on the dialog box. So yeah, now let's confirm that if I click the cancel button, my model will go away. So let's confirm that. Back to the browser. If I click this add new task, the form will come. If I click this, the dialog will display, and if I click cancel, you can see the dialog has gone away. Now I want, when someone clicks discard, I want this dialog to go away, and also this form to go away, because someone has discarded the process. So let's do that. When someone clicks discard, we want to close the model form and also the whole form itself, this task form. So let us do that. So to do that, I'll add an event listener to the discard button. So I'll say discard button. We already saved it here in our variable, so I can just use discard button. Then I'll add event listener, and I'll listen for the click event. So when that button is clicked, I'll call this function here. And what we'll do in this function, first we'll close the model. So I'll just copy this code and paste it here. First we want to close the dialog box. Then after closing the dialog box, we want also to hide the task form. So I can also use this code here. Because you say this toggle will check if the form is hidden. If it's hidden, it will display it, and if it's not hidden, we'll hide it. So we want, since the form is displayed, we want to hide the form. So I can just use this code. I think it's clear. So let's go to our browser and confirm that the discard button closes the model, the dialog box and also closes the model form. So let's see that. So back to our browser, if I click add new, this form will show up. If I click this cross, this model will show up. So if I click discard, and this should go away, and also this form should go away. Let me try. Yeah, and that is how discard works. So now discard is just fine. So now the next task that I want to do, I want us to handle this form. When someone submits this form, I want this form to be saved. So let us now handle this as our next task. So our next task that we'll do, we'll listen to this. What is that form? We'll get this form. We want to see if this form is submitted. We want to do something. So I'll get that form first. So I'll just get that form. Then I'll add an event listener to it. And I'll listen for the submit event. So when a form is submitted, this submit event is done, that is being triggered. So I'll listen for the submit event. And if that event is called, we'll do something here. So before we do this, let's first log this. Let's log this. Let us log that event first to see what it contains. So let me log that event, log A. And by default, when you submit a form, by default it refreshes. So we can just prevent the default behavior. So I'll say e.prevent default. So this prevent default will stop the browser from refreshing after the form has been submitted. So the default behavior of a form, if you submit the form, it refreshes it. So we want to prevent that behavior for refreshing so that you can see what our event is. So let's go to the browser and see this event. So back to the browser, if someone adds a new task and let's say now they fill it, let's fill this form. I'll write some random things there. So let us open the developer options and go to the console. We want to see if our submit is working. So if I submit this form by clicking this add task, you can see it's working because I can see this event is being logged, and this event is the submit event. So our event listener is just fine. So since submit is working, we want, when someone clicks submit, we want to take this data that someone has added as filled in the form, and we want to save it in our task data array, the array that we created, and say that array will be used to store the tasks that someone has filled. But before you store the data there, you want to check if the data exists, because maybe someone has that task already. So if someone has that task already, you want to update it. But if the task is not there, we want to add it. So first, before adding this data to the array, we first have to check if the data exists. So let us do that first. So to check if the data that is being added exists or not, we can use this array method called find index. And the find index array method finds and returns the index of the first element in an array that meets a certain criteria. So you have to first have a criteria, then if that criteria meets, it will return that index. And if that criteria does not meet, it should return -1. Maybe I'll show you an example of how I'll just create another file here. I call it test.js to show you how this find index works. So let's say I have an array of numbers. I'll call them numbers. I'll say const numbers, like that. So let's say I have this array of numbers like 3, 1, 5, and 6. So if I have that numbers, then I want to return a number that is greater than 3. So I'll say numbers dot find index like that. Then this method takes an arrow function, takes a callback function as its parameter. So it will take the number, so it will look through these numbers. So it will take that one number and check if that number is greater than 3. I think that is clear. So if this let me log this, or let me save it to a variable first. I'll call it, okay, you can just log this directly, not a must I save it. So if I log this, so before I log, maybe I can explain the code once more. So I have an array of numbers. I want to check these numbers to see if there's a number that is greater than 3. So this is the criteria that I'm using. I'm checking if this number if any of these numbers is greater than 3. So this method will loop through every number like this. The first number is not greater than 3, so it will be false. This one is not greater than 3, it will be false. This one is greater than 3, so it will return index. 0, 1 to index 2, because index 2 is greater than 3. You have said that find index returns the first index that meets certain criteria. So let us run this code and see. So if I run that code, you can see in my terminal it will write, I think there's an error. Let me check that error first. It says that number is not defined. Oh, I missed the spelling. Should be numbers, not number. I know some of you are yelling at me. Okay, let me just save the code and rerun it. So you can see it says 2, because the second index is the one that is greater than 3. Now let's assume that we don't have any number that's greater than 3, so I'll return this one to 2. Then this one will be something like 0. So if I run this code again, you can see it returns -1, because there's no number here that is greater than 3. So if there's no number that meets that criteria, it returns -1. But if there's a number that meets that criteria, returns that index of that number. I think you have understood how this find index works, and that is what we'll use. So back to our code. So to do that, we'll first check, instead of logging it, I'll just remove it. We'll check if the item is in task data. So I'll say task data dot find index. You have seen how this find index works. So I'll say task data dot find index, and we'll check if that item has an ID. Each item will have an ID. So that item dot ID, if that item in the task data is equal to the current task dot ID. I think that one is just clear. We are checking if the ID property of the item is strictly equal to the ID property of the current task. And then to save this in an array. So I'll just save it in an array. I'll call that array in a variable, not in an array. I'll call that variable data array index, like that. So the value of data array index, if there is no item, it will return -1, and if there's an item, it will return, it will have the value of the index of that item. I think by there you are clear. Now let's retrieve the values from the input fields and store them in the task object. And keep in mind, each task should have a unique ID. And one way of getting a unique ID, the simplest way that I found is using the date object. So maybe I can remind you about the date object. So let me just log. If I log the date but now shows the current time. If I log the current time, if I run this code, you can see here, let it run. So you can see this is the current time, and each time I run this code, the value changes. You can see it was 50, now it's 849. You can see the value each time I run this, the value changes. So you can use this number as our unique ID. So I think you have got that. Let us do that. So we'll create our task object here. So I'll say const task object. Let me just use obj is equals to, it's an object, so it will have an ID key. So I want the key to be that unique ID that you have done here. So you can just say our unique ID, want it to be date.now, and say date.now, like that. So but we want us to have an idea how is this ID associated to the task. So you can concatenate this unique value with the title. So I can say, let me use string literals. Let me use those backticks. So I can use backticks here, like that. Then this one will be a variable. So this one will be a variable, like that. Yeah. So I'll use another variable here. Then I separate them with a dash. So that variable will be title input. So here will be the title input. Let me use that. So this one will be title input dot value. So it said that to get the value of the input, use this dot value. Since this title input it's an input, so if I say title input dot value. So now let me try show you how here below here. So if now if they put their title as, let's say, pick or let's say finish project. If someone input this one as their title of the task, the ID will be something like this. It will be finish project, then dash, then some random numbers. It will be only numbers, some random numbers like that. But now this one is not good. We want it first. We want this all of it to be lowercase so that it can be an ID. So you can use that to lowercase function. It's a method, to lowercase method. So you can say here to lowercase. That's a method, so I'll have to call it like that. So if I call that to lowercase, this one will be small p, this one will be small f. If I turn it to, so this will be the title of a project, to lowercase. Then we want to join these two things. All these want to them to be joined. So I'll use first I'll split this string to an array. So I'll use split. I hope all these methods you have learned about them. So I'll use the split. Then I'll split where there's a space. So since there's a space here, this one will be an array of 2 items. Then it will be like that. If I split, it will be an array of 2 items. Then and to join, so I'll say dot join. So join turns an array into a string. We know that. And if I join like that, it will join this as one string like that. It will be that way. But now I want to join, then I want to have a space in between this, and to have a dash in between this. So I'll join with the hyphen. So it will be that way. So this is how I want my ID to be, and this one will be just that way because there is no space between these two variables. You can see there's no space. So this one will be my unique ID. So that is one way that I found that I can generate my ID. There are many ways. You can just find your own way, as long as that ID has to be unique. I find this one to be unique in my own ways. So you can just look at yours. Maybe you can use another way, but as long as at the end of the day your ID has to be unique. So yeah, now that I have the ID, I can have the rest of the keys. So the next key was the title, date, and the description. So let me just delete this one. This one was just for explanation purpose. So this object will have the ID, then it will have the title, then the value of the title will be just the title input dot value, like that. This is just simple. Then the value of the date will be the date input dot value. Then the value of the description will be description input dot value, like that. So this title input, date input, and description input, we have them up here as variables. So now we can just use them easily like that. So now our task object is complete. So the next thing, we want to check if this is -1 or is an array. If it is -1, we want to add the item. If it's an array, we do a different thing. So that is the next task. Just do it. I've said an array, but I meant if it is a number. So we want to check. We want to add our current object to our task array. But as I have said earlier, we want to, if this is -1, that means if the item does not exist in this array, we want to add it. But if it exists, we don't want to add it. So that is why we'll have that if condition to check if that value is -1. I think we already talked about this, so you can just do it. It's just simple. So below here I'll say if data, we called it data array index. If the value of that one is, let me put triple equals. If it's -1, this means if it is -1, it means that the task is not there. If the task is not there, I want to add it. So we'll just say task data dot. You can use push, but push will add it at the end of the array. But you want to add it at the beginning of the array. So we'll use unshift. Then we'll add the task object. So I think that is clear. So the next thing that you want to do, now that you have added it, first you can just log it so that you can see it is added. So let's log this thing in the console. It's called task data. So yeah, let me log this task data. Then let's go to the browser and see if our task data is adding it correctly. So if you go to the browser and click this add new task, the form will come up. So let me just say test. Then let me add a date. I'll say today's date. Then I'll write a description here, some random text. Then if I click add, you can see there's this array that is being logged, and you can see our item is being added to the array successfully. And you can see, if you take a look at, if you zoom this, if you take a look at this, you can see our ID is being added well. So the ID is just the title, then a dash, then a random number. So you can see our ID is being added well. So maybe if I try adding another thing, let's say finish, then project, then I say the date is tomorrow's date, then I say the description is finish Java project. Then if I click add, you can see now the array has 2 items, and our new item is being added as the first item. So it's being added at the beginning of the array because we used an and shift. And if I zoom this, you can see now this ID, let me just expand it. This ID is the title in lowercase. So you say I wrote the title in uppercase, but now it's in lowercase. F is small f. Then they are joined using this dash. So it should be finish dash project dash then a random number. So you can see our ID is very unique for each project, for each task. So now that you have added now that you can successfully store the task in an array, the next thing is that we want, when someone adds, you want them to see the task here in the UI. So that is our next task. So let us do that. So instead of logging this data, we want it to display in the UI. So we want it to display here. I showed you where we want to display our tasks, here inside this div. And this div, we named it tasks container. You can confirm in the variables there, we named it tasks container. So we'll store our data there. So first let us look through that data. So that data is stored in this array called task data. So we'll use for each to look through each item. So for each item, we want to do something, and that something is this. For each item, we want to do something. But instead of saying for each item or for each, they're called tasks. So instead of saying for each task, then inside here you say something like task.id, then task.id, then you say task.title. Instead of doing that, you can just destructure your ID and titles here. You can just destructure them. That is the easiest way. So I can destructure the title has an ID, so I can destructure the ID. I can destructure the title. These are the elements that are in the task ID title. Then there's the date. Then there's the description. So you can ask me how I got this. These are these keys here, because this object is being saved in this task data array, and this object is each individual task. So instead of looping through each individual task, we can just destructure the task one way, so that when you come inside here, we just use the ID. We don't use the task.id, task.title. I think that is even easier. So yeah. So since you have looped through each task, we can get this div. We named it tasks container. You can get this div like that. So you can get that div there. Then you can say .inner HTML. You want to write the HTML is equals to, then you write our HTML code there. But if you say it is equal to this, that means that in every task we'll be overwriting. Let me show you. So if you create a first task, we'll say a task will be here. Then since you're using is equals to, it will remove the initial task and write a new task. But we don't want that to be the case. We want, if someone adds a new task, you want it to be on top of the existing task. So we'll do something like plus equal. So plus equal means that in HTML plus the new thing. I think you know how to use the plus equal. So I'll write here plus equal. Then inside there, I'll create another div. So I'll create another div. So now I'm writing HTML code, because this in HTML accepts an HTML, or you can just write a text, does not care. So I'll create a div there. I'll close that div. So inside this div is where I'll place my task, each individual task. Then this div, I'll give it a class of task, because in my HTML I already styled this thing, so I'll just use that class. Then to make each task unique, I'll make use of the unique, so I'll make use of the ID. Then I'll say ID will be equal to this ID, but this, since it's a variable, I'll use this syntax for the ES6. So what I was telling you earlier is that you can see now I can just use ID like that. But if I did something like this, if I did here each task, I could be saying here task dot ID. So you can use this method, but I found this method to be better. This one for destructuring, then using the ID as is. Then inside here, I'll create another paragraph like that. Then inside this paragraph, I'll display my title. So I'll say title. My title will be there. So I'll just say title like that. But before I display the title, I'll use the label title, that label. But I'll surround it in a strong tag like that. So I'll click here, then I click here, then I write strong. Yeah. So I've created a paragraph. Then that paragraph has this label title. Then this the actual title that someone has written. So this same structure is the one I'll use for the rest, like for the date. So I'll just duplicate here. That one will be for the date. This one will be for the description. So the thing that I'll change, I'll just change this one to date. Then I write here date. Then I'll change this one to description. This is just a label, description. I hope the spelling is right. Then I'll write here description like that. So now I have all my data here. Then we have said that you are doing all the CRUD operations. So CRUD as you have already created. This one will be for the read. To read is just to view. Then you want to edit, update, and delete. To update is to edit. So I can create a new button below here. I can say it's a button. So all this I'm writing is just HTML. So that's why I'm not explaining too much, because it's just simple HTML. Then the button, this button will be called edit. No, let me first add the class. I've styled already the button, so this button will be of type button. Then they'll have a class of btn. All these classes are styled already in the CSS. You can take a look at them. There'll be two buttons. One will be for edit. One will be for delete. And I hope my code is correct. Let me just go through it. So what you have done, since you have our data in our task data array, you have already seen that because we logged and saw that it is working. So we want to look through that array, and for each task, and to create a div in the task container in this div. In this div, and to get another div inside here, and that div will have a paragraph displaying the title of the task, then a paragraph displaying the date, another paragraph displaying the description. Then I'll have two buttons, one for edit and one for delete. So let me save this code and go to the browser. I hope there's no errors. So let me go to the browser and see how this displays. Also, we saw that after adding the task, it's called what? That form didn't go away. So before we see this data, the form has to go away first. So you can see the error. So I can just write the code that we use to hide the form. The code is here. This line of code, I can just copy it. I can just copy this line. Then I paste it down here where this one has ended. Here, I can paste it. I can just paste it there like that. So what this will do, after adding the tasks in my form, it will hide that form so that I can see this added content. So let's go to the browser and confirm that. So I'll just close this console because I'm not using it anymore. So if I add a new task, let's say I'll say this task is called finish project. or I'll finish the project tomorrow. So tomorrow I'll say finish project 5 tomorrow. I don't know the spelling of tomorrow, but this just to tell you that tomorrow we'll be doing our final project for this course. So just stay tuned and reload it there. I believe that is the right spelling of tomorrow. So if I fill this form and I say add task, you can see now the task is being displayed. So after if I click add task, the form is being hidden, then the task is being displayed here. So you can see that's working fine. So let's go back to our code and see what we'll do next. But before we go back to our code, you can see that if I add a new task, yes, I add this test task. I add that, then I add the description. If you click add task, you can see it's adding. But when I add a new task again, you can see this form contains the previous data, but that's not code user experience. Now we want when someone clicks this add new task, we want this form to be empty. So that is our next task. When someone adds a new task and adds another one, we want the form to be empty. So you can create a function to do that. Let us do that. So we want to create a function that will clear the inputs that the user adds. So that function, you can call it reset. So let us create that function. I'll create it up here. So I'll create that function reset, and it will be an arrow function. So I'll say const reset, and the work of this function is just to set the inputs to back to blank, and that is what we will do. So first we have already defined the function. So we'll set all the inputs to empty strings. So I'll set the title input. So I'll say title input dot value. No, I select the wrong thing. It should be title input. Title input dot value. Don't set that to an empty string. So after someone has already added something, we want the value of the input to be blank again. That's why I'm doing this. Let input dot value, and it to be an empty string like that. Then also the description input dot value, we want that also to be an empty string. So you can do that. So this will solve our bug. So we have to call this function. Also the next thing, also the current task, because someone might have added a task. So this current task, we also want to set it to an empty object, so that when someone is adding a new task, this current task will be an empty object. So that is key. So you can call this function here in here. But we can also add this line in the function to make our function reusable. I can just cut that line and add it here in my function. I can just add it to that line there. So if I call this reset function, I can just call it here after adding my element in the UI, and to call the reset function. Reset. So what we'll do now, if someone has filled the form and has clicked and has submitted the form, first this one will be created and it will be displayed in the UI. And remember, still the form is there, so first you have to close the form. So we'll call this method. This method will clear the form. Since these things have already been displayed in the UI, you can just clear the inputs, and that's what you are doing. We are clearing all the inputs. Then we'll also hide the form and also set the current task to be 0. This will make our form to be reusable. We can go to the browser and confirm that. If you go to the browser now and add a new task, I'll call this task, let's say finish project. I call this as finish project. Then I'll set the date maybe to be 30th. Then I'll add description. I'll say finish 5th project. Then if I add this task, you can see it is adding fine. And if I click add new task, now the form is empty. So you can see now our bug is solved. So the next thing that you want to do is when someone clicks this icon and then they click this discard button, currently you are just closing the model form and they're closing the dialog box and the model form, but you want, let's say if someone had typed something here, if I close this thing, I want also these inputs to be closed, because now you can see if I click discard, then I add a new task, you can see this task also exists there. So if I click discard, everything should be empty again. So let's do that. We'll just reuse the same function. So let's go to our code and do that. Back to our code. If you want to do that, we can go to where the discard button was. It was here. So you can see what the discard button was doing was closing the dialog form, then hiding the form. But now instead of hiding the form, we can reuse the function that we created, this reset function. You can see the reset function also hides the form. So you can, instead of hiding the form, we can call the reset function. So like just like the how we said, the reset function will set all the inputs to an empty string, then we'll hide the form, and that will solve our bug. You can go to the browser and confirm that. So now if I create a new task and I start typing here, then I type there, then I say I don't want to add the task, then I discard, then I add a new task. You can see now the form is empty, but initially when I discarded, the form was not empty. So that we have reused our reset function, and we have done that well. So let's go and look at the next task. Currently, when you click this close icon, it displays this cancel or discard button, but that is not good user experience. You should only display the model form if there is content here. If someone has written something, then they press this, is when they should be this option. But if someone has not written anything, in this title or this, if there's nothing in the form, and someone presses this one, you want to close it. I think that is good. If there's nothing, when someone clicks this, it should close. But if there's something, you can ask the user, are you sure? Because there's something they have done. But if they have done nothing, you just want to close the form directly. So that is our next task. To do that, we'll have to go to the close task form button. It's here where the model is being shown. So you don't want to show the model just that. We want to first check if there's changes, and if there's changes, we'll show the model. If there's no changes, we want just to close the form. So I'll create a variable here. I'll call it form input. I'll say const customer. I'll call it form input contain values. I'll call that variable like that. It's a long one. So this variable is just checking if the form input contains values. So I'll just check if the title has value. So I'll say if the title input dot value, if it has something, it will store it there. If it has a value, it will store there. And or either this one or the date input. If the date input has value also, if any of them has value, not all of them, if either of them has value, that's why I'm using the or. This is or. These two pipes are called or the description input has value. I think that is clear. I'm checking if the title input or the date input or the description input, if either of them has a value, and if it has a value, I'll store that value in this form input contain value variable. Then before displaying this model, I'll check if this one has a value, it will return true, and if it has no value, it will return null, or it will return a false value, and that false value is false. So I'll say if this one is true, that if it will only be true if it has values. So if it is true, show the model, and if it is not true, so I'll write here else. If it is not true, call the reset function. And I've seen that the reset function, what it does is just close the model one way. It does nothing else, just closes the model. So you can go to the browser and confirm that it works. If you go back to our browser and click this add new task, you can see since there's nothing I've done, if I click the close, it will just close. It will not ask me for if I'm sure or not. But if I've done something and I click close, it will ask me, are you sure you want to close? And that is a good user experience, because you can't ask somebody if they're sure to discard the changes and there's no changes. So I think now our code is just working fine. Let's go back to our code and see the next task. So I think by now at least you have done some functions. The next thing that you can do, if you look at this submit event, it is very long. It has a lot of content. We can try to make each as an individual function. We're just refactoring our code right now. Let's make our code easy to read. So on top here there'll be variables. Then here I'll be doing the functions. Then below there I'll be doing event listeners. So this below here there'll be event listeners. So I want my code to be that readable. So I want to reduce this submit function into, and to make this, you can see now currently submit function is doing two tasks. The first task is doing the create. You can see here you are doing create, then here you are doing read. So you can make this create as a separate function and this read as a separate function, so that now you are trying to do, it's called separation of concerns. We don't want to congest our code into one place. We want to separate it. So I'll just create another function here in functions. Allow me to create another function here. I'll create it on top. I'll say const. I'm using an arrow function. I'll call it. So this is for adding, and the same function for adding, we'll use it for update. So I'll call it add or update. You're adding or updating the task. So I'll say add or update task. So it will be an arrow function. Then what I'll do, I'll copy the code that we used to add or update. This code here, where is it? All this code for adding and updating. This one here, all this code. This, I think it's until there. So I'll cut that code. That code was for adding or updating. So I'll move that code to this function here. Yeah, I think that is clear. I've not done anything. I've just created a function and I've moved that code there. Didn't change any logic. So the next thing that I'll do, I'll create another function for this. This one is for read. So I'll create another function for displaying. So I'll call it, I'll create it here below the add or update. I'll call it. So you are reading the tasks, and by reading you are also updating the task container. So this is the task container here. It's called the tasks container. So you are updating that. So you can call this our function update task container, but it's actually for reading. So let us call update task container, and it will be an arrow function. And what we'll do, we'll just copy this code here. We'll just copy this code here. I think it's until there, if I'm not wrong. Just copy that code and paste it here in this function. So yeah, I think by now our functions are reusable. So inside this add or update, after adding, I want to call this update contain function. I want to call this function because after there you are doing it down there. After you added it, you want it to display in the UI. So I can call this function inside this other function. I think that one is just clear. That's how we did it before. So I can call this add, I can call that function there. Then I can remove, where is that, my function. I can also move this function, can cut that function and also put it here. Here. So basically this was all our logic. Initially this was all our logic, all of this, but you have breaked it into functions. So it will start here as usual. It will start here until here. Then you will call this function. That means it will continue with this logic down here. Then next you'll call this reset function as usual. So it's just the same. The thing that is remaining is just to call this add or update function, and I'll call it in the submit here. I'll call it there. So I've just refactored my code and added it to be readable. So now you can see on top here is just variables. Then here is just functions. Then below here is just event listener, nothing much, just event listener. Yeah, and that looks good to me. You can just run our code to confirm it's still working. Just run our code. So if you got the browser, I can see I can still add my task. If I click add new task, I can still add task. I'll call it task 1. And if I change this date, you can see I can still add my task. If I add it, you can see it can still be. I can add and I can so it's still working there it was working, and I click add new task, it's still empty. Everything else is just working there it was. Nothing has changed if I do something. So I didn't change anything and I didn't add any functionality. I just refactored the code, and that is clear. So let us go and do the next task. I noticed there's a bug. So let's say I already have a task. Then if I add another task, let's say I add task 2. Task 2. Let's say add that task to be that date and say second task. If I click add, you can see there's a bug because task 1 is still there and there's two more tasks. That means it duplicates the old task and the new task, and that is not a good thing that you want it. So before we add a new task, we can set the task container to an empty string first so that it clears this one. Then if I add a new task, there will be only two tasks. Let us do that, then come back to confirm if it's working fine. So to do that is just simple. I'll just come here before adding or updating tasks. I'll first set the task container to an empty string. So this task container .inner.html, I'm setting it to an empty string first. And then if I add a new task, they'll both add, because keep in mind when you're adding a new task here, your class is equal. You are taking the old task and you are combining it with the new task. So if you push this into our DOM, that's why there is repetition. So before pushing, we first clear it, then we push. I think that is fine. You can go to the browser and check if it works well. So if you go to the browser now, let's say I add a new task. Let's say task 1. Task 1, then I'll put any date there. Then I'll say first task. If I add that task 1, you can see it's just working fine. If I add task 2, then I put any date there, just put the date. Then I say second task. Then if I add that task, you can see now the error is gone. Now if I add another task, there'll just be the number of tasks that I've added. There'll not be duplications. And that is what we wanted. So the next thing, we want to make this edit and delete buttons to work. So if someone clicks edit, we'll listen to that event and we'll be able to update the task. And when someone clicks delete, we want to remove the task. So you can do those tasks now. Perform the edit and delete functionalities. We first have to listen for those events. You have first to check if those buttons are clicked. And if you remember, the buttons are not in the HTML, they are here. We created them ourselves in the JavaScript. So for we to know that they are clicked, we can add an on-click attribute to these buttons. So I'll say here, like I'll add there on click, like that. And when this button is clicked, I want it to call this function called edit task. So I've not created this function. I'll create it and list it like edit task, like that. So it's a function, and I'll call it using the current element that has been clicked. So I'll use this. So also I can just copy the same and paste it here on the delete. You can just place it anywhere, it has to be there. But this one will call the delete task function. So yeah, that is how we'll know so I'll just remove this. Just for consistency, I'll just put this one here so that they can be the same, but it's not a must. But for consistency, I just prefer it that way. So yeah, so now all our two buttons have this on click attribute that will, when the button is clicked, this function will be called. So now we have to define this function. So I'll start with the delete, because the delete is just simple. Let us start with the delete, then we'll see how the delete works. Then later we'll work on the edit. So for the delete, first let's create the actual function. So I'll create here. Let me just scroll up so that you can see. So I'll create here a function. I'll say const, you call it delete task. So I'll call it delete task, like that. I'll call that function. So it will be an arrow function. If I missed an is equal here, it will be that way. So delete task will be an arrow function, and this function went to get the actual element in which this button was clicked. The actual task. You see, every task, this we said that all this div is a task. So every task has this edit and delete button. So you want to get the actual task that on which this button was clicked. Yeah. That's why I use this keyword here. And this is a keyword that refers to the current context. So for each task, I'll get here the actual element that was clicked. So I'll say here it's button element. the button element. Say I'll call it button EL, but this is just a parameter. It's not actually the element. Then the next thing that I'll do, I'll first check what is the index of that. You have said that these items are stored in this array. That's that array. So I'll check the index of that item in this array, because you want to remove it from this array. So you can't remove an item until you know their index. So I'll check for their index, and I'll use the same method that we used, that find index method. So I'll say task data dot find index. I think we all know how to use this find index by now. So I'll say task data dot find index. This one should be a dot, not a comma. It'll be a dot. So we have said this function takes, this method takes a callback function. So we'll look through the items. So I'll say for each item, and to do what? And to compare the item ID. So I'll say item dot ID, because each item has an ID. You have seen that. We all know that. So I'll say if the item dot ID is equal to this clicked task dot parent element we are doing this because, keep in mind, this is the actual button that will be clicked. This one you're doing delete. So delete, this button is done that will be clicked, and you're listening for this. So this is the actual button that this is the actual context of this. So this refers to this button. I know this can be confusing, but now in this context, this refers to this button. So we're checking if the item.id is equal to this button, its parent is this div, then id. That's why I said button element dot parent element dot id, because each task has this id attribute here, and then to check if that value of that id is equal to this value of that id of the item. So that way we'll get the actual task that wants to be deleted. And I've said that this one returns the index, so we'll store it in a variable, because it does not return the actual task, it just returns the index. So just like before, we'll store that in a data array index like that. But because of the scope, this is not the same as that array index. They're different because of the scope. This variable is only visible in this scope here. So they are different variables, they're not the same variables. So yeah, now that you have the index, we can just remove that. You can remove that element from the array by using splice. I think splice is the easy one. If you don't know how to use splice, splice is an array method that takes the start index, the number of items to remove, and the number of items to replace. So you can say task data dot splice. So we want to remove items from where? From here, from the start. This will be our start index. How many items do you want to remove? Only one item. How many items do you want to replace? Nothing. But if you say 0, it will replace it with 0. So this one, the third argument is usually an optional argument. So now this way we'll remove that individual task from the array. Then we want to remove it from the array, and also want to remove it from the DOM. But to remove it from the DOM is even simpler. We'll just do something like, we'll say button element dot parent element, because we want to remove all of this, because we have said this button element is just this button, but you want to remove all that task from the DOM. So we'll say button element dot parent element dot remove. This way we'll have removed all this task, all this div from the DOM, and that is how the delete will have been successful. So you can go to the browser and confirm if this delete is working fine. Let's go to the browser and confirm that. So if you got the browser, you can add a new task there. I'll call it task 1. Then I'll just choose a random date. Then I'll say here first task. Then if I add that task, if I delete it, you can see it's out of the DOM, and also in the array it's also removed from the array. But our main concern is this DOM. So you can see now the item is not present in the in the DOM. So the delete is working fine. So now let us work on the edit or update. Let us work on that. So to make the edit or update functionality to work, we'll just do it almost the same as delete. So you'll realize that we have this on click attribute on the edit button that listens. If that button is clicked, this function will be called. It's called edit task, and it takes this, just like how we explained in the delete. This is the actual button that is being clicked, is the value that will be the value of this. So to do the edit, I just create that function. We have said it's called edit task, so I'll say edit task, and it will equal to an arrow function. Then just like the delete, it will take this button element as an argument there. That. So now we have the structure of our edit button. So we start working on the body function body. So the first thing is to get the actual task that is being edited, and we can just do it. You can just copy this code the way we did it in delete. I will just copy that code and paste it there, because we want to find the index of the actual task that is being edited. So we'll just use the same logic as we used for the delete, and since we explained it in delete, we'll just continue. So after getting that, the next thing, you want to retrieve the task that is being edited. We want to retrieve that task and we want to store it to the current task object. We have said that the work of this current task object is to keep track of the task that is being edited. So we want to take the task that has been selected and we want to store it in this current task object. So to do that, first, to get the task, you can use the square bracket syntax to get our tasks for an array. So we'll say task data, then we'll say data array index, because I've said that if the item is present, that array index will return the index of that item. So you are calling the task data array with the index of that item. Then after getting that, we want to store that data to this current task object. So I'll store this in the current task object. So it's right here, current task object. So now we have the data of the current task that is supposed to be edited. So after getting that, we can change the input fields to contain this data. By default, the input fields are usually blank, but now when someone opens that form, we want those inputs to have the values of this selected task, so that someone can edit it. So we'll say title input dot value. We want this input to have the value of the current task dot title. I think that is just direct. Also the date input, the same thing. The date input dot value. So this date input is just the input field. So we want it to have a value of current task dot date. Then the description input, we need to have the value of current task dot description. So now our form has these values. The values of the task to be edited are now in the form. So now someone can delete it and write the new values that they want to replace. So that is just fine. So the next thing, we want to change this. Keep in mind that we're using the same form. So here is our form. So this form says add task. So we want to change this text from add task to update task. This text here, so that someone can know that they are not adding a task, but they are updating it. So we call that that button, we call it add or update task button. We call it that way. Then you say dot inner HTML and write the value to be update task. Yeah. Then after doing all that, we want to show the form. We want to make the form to be visible. So as usual, we always do task form dot class list dot toggle, and we have to toggle the hidden the hidden class. This one I've done it a lot of times. I'll not explain it because now we all know what this code does. This code, if the form is not there, it will show it, and if it's shown, it will hide it. So now, yeah, that's fine. So now we'll have our form, and the form will have this data, and someone can change the value of these ones and will submit the form. But there's a problem, because at this point, if you submit the form, the changes won't reflect, because keep in mind here when you are adding or updating in this add or update task, you are only changing if you are only checking if the item is not there, and you are adding the task to that item, but you are not handling this one is for create. You're not handling for the update. So you can put an else. You can say here else it will only be called if the item is there. And keep in mind, you're only editing the item if it's there. So if it's not there, it will add that item in the task data array. But if it's there, you don't want to add, you just want to update. Yeah. So we'll get that actual item. Let's say task data, then data, and the index. Then if it's there, we'll just update the task object like that. I think that is clear. First, in the edit task, we got the actual element that is being clicked. Then we set all that data to this current task object. Then we change the value of the form inputs to have the value of this task that wants to be edited, so that someone can change those values. Then after that, we have edited the submit button to say update task instead of saying add task. You want it to say update task. Then you want to show the form. Then after someone has finishing editing, it will call this. When someone submits the form, it calls this method. You can confirm here. When someone submits the form, where is it? Submit. It calls this add or update task. That's why you're editing this add or update task, because when someone submits the form, this submit event will be triggered, and this function will be called. That's why we're going to that function now. So if you go to that function, arrow delete, if you look at this function, we are only checking if the item is not there, and you're adding the task to the array. But what if the item is there? So that's why you added this else condition. This else will be called if the item is there. So if the item is there, you want just to update. So you'll get that item, and you'll replace the value of that item with this new object. And that is how the update works. So you can go to the browser and confirm that it works well. I know by now everybody is yelling at me because I forgot here to write dot value. I hope you saw that and you're yelling at me, but I've seen it. Yeah. Also, in this on click, I forgot to put these quotes around this function, although they work without them, but it's the correct syntax is to put these quotes around them. Yeah, I think those are the only things that I forgot. If there's another thing, maybe you can remind me, but yeah. So now we can test the edit to see if it's working fine. I'll just save my code and test the edit. So now if you go to the browser and add a new task, I'll call it task 1. Then I put tomorrow's date. Then I say this is the first task. Then I save, I add the task. Then if I want to edit, if I click on this edit, you can see the form is there and it has the values already. And this is written to update task. It's not written add task, it's written update task. So I can easily edit this task and maybe change the name. I can say maybe it's finish project, or you can just search anything. You can change even the date of the task. You can just change anything that you want. Then after changing, you can click update task, and you can see now the task has changed. So that means that our edit is working fine. But there's a new error. If I click add new task, you can see it's still saying update task, but it should say add task because I'm adding the task. It should only say update task when I'm editing it. So you can solve that bug next. Let us solve that bug. To fix that bug, we can go in the add or update task function. Then the first thing that we can do is we can change the inner text. So we'll say add or update task button dot inner text, or you can say in HTML. And that, let me just use in HTML for consistency. Then to change the text to add task like that. And also this, I think this line, this one for setting the container to an empty string, it should be, it works fine. If it's here, it was working fine. But if it is better, since this one is updating the task, the UI, let us put it in the same function that updates the UI. That one is this function here, so you can put it on top of this function there like that. So it does the same thing, but now it will be updating if someone is reading, not when someone is creating. I think that makes more sense to me. It was working here, but it is better when it's there. It will also work. So we can check if this is working fine. So let's go to our browser and check this add task. So if you got the browser and add a new task, I just call it task 1. Then I set the date to tomorrow's date. Then write any description there. Then I click add task. You can see it's adding well. If I click add new task, you can see now the task is writing add task. Now a bug is solved. And also let's see that one for duplicating code, if it still works, that one for duplicating code. So if I add new task, then I add another task, let's say that one. So since you have changed that code, let's see if there's not. So you can see it still works. The one that the error that was there before when you added a new task, it was duplicating. You have shifted its position, but it still works. So yeah. But now there's a new bug. If I click edit, then if I don't touch anything, then I close the form, it's prompting me this thing of changing. But that's not good user experience. I want it to prompt if I change something, is when I want it to prompt. But if I have not changed anything, I want it to remain, to just close the form. So we can just do that in our next, that as our next task. So to solve that bug, first you have to check if the form has been changed. So you can create a variable to do that. So I'll call this variable, let me call it, create it first. I'll call it form input values updated. I'll say form input values updated. So this variable is keeping track of the form input values and is looking if they are updated. So let me copy this, then paste it here. So this one, it will check if the title input.value, it will be if the form will be updated if the title input.value is not equal to the current task.title. Since you are saving the current task in this, you're saving the thing in this current task, so I'll check if the title of the current task is not equal to that input, or the date input is not equal to the current, is not equal to the current task.date, or the description is not equal to current task.description. So this is how we'll check if the form has been changed, because keep in mind that when you are updating, where is it? The edit. We are storing our value in this current task object. So if the title is not equal to the input, because by default when you click update, the title will be equal to the input. That is what we set it in the update. So if someone changes the title, that means the value of that title input will not be equal to the value of the current title. So that will mean that someone has changed it. So if someone has changed it, is when we want to show the confirm model box. But if someone has not changed anything, we want it to close. So we can just add this new variable here as an extra argument here. We can say if this one and so this model form will only show if someone has put values and the values are not equal to the initial values, and this form that dialog box will show. I think that's just clear and straight to point. So let me save my code and go to the browser and confirm that. So if I close the browser and I add a new task, as I said, add this task 1, I put a random date and a random description, and I add that task. So now when I click edit and I don't change anything and I close, it just closes. But if I click edit and maybe I change the description to, let's say, first task, then I click close, it will ask me if I want to change, because if I discard, it will not save these changes, and that is good user experience, and that is what we wanted each to do. So that is it. Let's go to the next task. Now our app is just working fine. Someone can create a task, that is create in CRUD. So I can create a task in a description, then I can read that task. So create, read, they're good, and I can create even one task. Maybe I create another task here. Can create as many tasks as I want, write any description there. So you can see the app is just working fine. I can delete this task. If I don't want it, I can delete it. No, create, read, I can update this one. Maybe I can update and say this one is first task. I can update this one. You can see the update is working. So if I update it, it's updating. Then I can delete this one. If I don't want it, I can delete. So you can see all the CRUD operations are working well in my app. Create, read, update, and delete. But now I have a small problem. If I refresh my page, everything goes away, and that is not good. So and when I refresh my page, the task still remains, and that is where the local storage comes in. So I want to save my data in local storage, so that when I refresh, it still remains. So that is our next functionality that we'll add in our app. We want to utilize the local storage to make our data persistent, so that when we refresh, the data will still be there. So first here, when you are creating the item, where is that function? This function for adding or updating a task. So when someone adds a task, we want to save that task in our local storage. So I believe by now we all know about the local storage. If you don't know about the local storage, you can watch our video. I think it's video 54. We talk about the local storage somewhere there. So you can watch that video and learn more about local storage. So to save data into local storage, use a set item method. So you say set item like that. Then this method, you provide a key. So my key, I'll call it data. Then you provide the actual data that you want to store in that key. So the data that I want to store is this task data. But with no local storage, if you store this, it will come as it should not be readable. So for it to be readable, we'll convert it into a string. So we'll save it as a string so that someone can see it easily. So we'll say JSON.stringify. JSON.stringify. If you don't know about these things, kindly visit the video about local storage and learn about local storage, then come back and finish this. This is actually the last part. Our app is over. You just want to improve it by keeping the data persistent. So yeah, we'll store the data in local storage that way. So when someone adds a task, we can store it in local storage. Even if someone updates that task, it's still stored in local storage, because this function, as you can see, the name is used to add or to update. So if someone adds or updates, the data will be stored in local storage. So that's the first thing. Then when someone deletes a task, we want also to update our local storage. So if someone deletes a task, we want to where is that delete? Let me go to that delete function. It's here. So if someone deletes a task, we also want to make our data persistent, so we can remove that item from local storage. But since we already have this logic for removing that item from the task data array, I don't want to change this code, so let me retain it there. Then if someone has deleted the task, instead of removing it from local storage, you can just, since you're removing it from this array, you can just save the data again to local storage. So we'll just use the same code that you wrote up there. I'll just go and copy it. That code is here, so I'll use this same code. I just copy that code and paste it here. I think it makes sense, because if someone deletes something from the task data array, you are removing it already. The logic is there. Then after removing it, you want to save the new data in local storage. I think that is fine. So now if someone refreshes the page, we want to retrieve the data from local storage. So initially our task data was an empty array, but now we want it to be, if there's items in the local storage, you want it to be those items, and if there's no items, you want it to be an empty array. So we'll just retrieve the data from the local storage and store it in this task data array. So I'll say, to retrieve data from local storage, you just say local storage.get item. So I'll say local storage.get item. Then you pass the key. And if you remember, our key was data, so I'll pass data like that. So this line of code here assigns our data that is saved in local storage to this array. And if there's no data, it will be an empty array as it was before. So this will make our data persistent. So even if someone refreshes the page or come back, or even if you close the browser and run the code again, it will still fetch the data from local storage first. Then if there's no data, is when it will be an empty array. But keep in mind that we stored the data as a string, so we have to pass this so that it can be well. So you have to pass this data first. So you'll say JSON.pass. Again, if you don't understand these things for stringify passing, you can watch our videos. All of them are in this video for local storage. I'll attach the link of that video in the video description. If you want to go back to it, I'll give that link in the video description. So yeah, so now we have stored our data in. We have stored this task data there. So if you want to display the available data first, you have to check if this task data is empty or not. I think that makes sense, because currently if you run the code, you are getting the data, but it's not displaying, because by default our container here is empty. It's empty. So if there's data, we want to fill this container with something, and if there's no data, we'll just ignore it. So you can set that condition. Let me put it below functions, below these functions. Before event listeners, I'll put my code here. So I'll say if task data dot length so this if task data dot length, if the task data has something, its length will be like 1 or above 1. If it has nothing, its length will be 0, and 0 is a false value. This condition will be false. But if it's any other thing, it will be a truth value, and this condition will be true, and this code inside here will work. So if there's data, I want to call this update task container function. And what this function does, you have already seen. It just updates the container with the data. You can just confirm it here. What it does, it just loops through that data and updates our container. So it will only loop if there is data. So that's why we are calling it using an if condition here. If there's data, we'll call that. If there's no data, just skip this code. And with that, our app will be complete. So you can go to the browser and confirm that all our functions are working. So let's go and confirm that. If I go to the browser, I can see these tasks. These are the tasks that are already here. If I refresh, you can see they're not going away because the code is updated. But let me just delete it so that you can not think I'm cheating. So if I add a new task, let's say task 1, then I set the date to that date, then I make a description. If I add the task, if I refresh, you can see it's not going away. Yeah, and if I try to, all the functions like edit is working, first task, and if I save, it's being saved. So the edit is working, the delete is working. As you have seen, I've deleted the initial tasks. So now our code is just fine. Even if I open this code in a new tab, if I just copy this URL and open a new tab here and paste that URL there, you can see the task is still there. Even if I close the browser and open another and open it again, it will still be there. And to check check for your data, you can always inspect, but this is stored in the local storage video. If you go to the application tab here, application tab of your browser, and you look for the data, if you look, this is the URL. If I click on that URL and I expand it, you can see there's this data, and this data contains our data. So if I add a new task here, say task 2, then I set the date and I write a description and I add that task. You can see the task is added here. So this is where our data is being stored in the application tab. Then you go to local storage, then you click the URL of your app. Mine is this URL, localhost 5500. Then if you go to here, you can see all these are the keys that I've saved. But there's this data. This is mine, this data. It's done that I've saved it now. We saved it using the key of data. So if you go to this data, you can click, I can see all my data. All my data is saved there. So that is it for this app, guys. You can always improve the app and you can make it even more better. See you in the next video where we'll talk about the random quote machine and we'll make use of APIs. So, peace out.